Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville government, politics, news, business, education, anything that gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com, joined as always, by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing, Scott?
Oh, I'm just fine, Jesse. Another beautiful fall day today. It's Thursday.
That's right. We're taping a little bit early this week.
Yeah.
Want to say that right up front, just in case any really big, exciting news comes out between now and when this podcast will be posted on Sunday. If anything has happened on Friday, we're going to have to come back next week and talk about it. But we do have some things to talk about.
Absolutely.
We are going to talk a little bit about, speaking of ongoing situations, what's going on in the House of Representatives. We talked to our own Congressman Tim Burchett about his thoughts on all of that, and that is still in process right now. The city of Knoxville bought some property on the south waterfront to facilitate a pedestrian bridge. We're going to talk about that. The Advanced Knox planning process, which has been going on for the last 18 months or so, that is moving out of its conceptual stage and into its action stage. And to start us all off, we had actually several bits of news this week about a political race that is typically sort of a quiet one, something that doesn't always or often or even at all for the last 30 plus years generate much drama, but it has this week, and that is the race for Knoxville Municipal Judge. Scott, what is going on there?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the first time since 2003 there's even been a contested race for municipal judge. So yeah, it's pretty unusual to have first of all a contested race, and B, one that sparks a little bit. And there was the League of Women Voters of Knoxville and Knox County hosted a forum, as they are wont to do, for the judicial candidates last Monday, and it got kind of interesting. It was a little the incumbent is John Rawson, who's been the judge since 1986 when he was appointed to replace the previous judge who had died. Rawson was then subsequently elected in 87 and has been reelected every time ever since. And he's running against Tyler Cavanis, who is very young. He's only 31, and he's Rawson's 76. So it's definitely a race where experience versus young blood is kind of an underlying theme, and Cavanis made sure that was front and center in the discussion on Monday. Several times he was kind of aggressive is a little too strong of a word when you're talking about two people running for a judgeship. I mean, it wasn't, they weren't coming to blows or anything, but he was a little more aggressive on pointing out that he is he is younger. He's more. He's got energy. He's got new ideas that he can bring in to help modernize municipal court, which is they can only really talk about things like that because municipal court, they handle violations of city code, not criminal matters. Nobody goes to jail out of city court. It's all traffic tickets and codes violations and things like that for the most part. And so he really hammered home that. Of course, Rawson said, "Yeah, I'm running on my record, and it's a good record, and I'm proud of it." And he talked himself about things that he's done to modernize the court, doing things like, now they've got a video screen where they can watch police body cameras and footage from them and footage from dashboard cams and Google Earth shots of places where accidents might have occurred, things like that. So that went on. And per the league rules, anytime you mention your opponent has 30 extra seconds to respond, and Rawson was afforded 30 extra seconds on a couple of occasions there, and that was a big thing. The other aspect that was that Cavanis brought out several times was that Rawson had received the endorsement of the Knox County Republican Party. The judges race, like all city races, are nominally nonpartisan, but the Republican Party has endorsed Rawson, and he made a big deal, and Cavanis made a big deal out of that. And the kind of by now infamous picture of Rawson with then candidate Donald Trump in 2015 at a campaign stop where Rawson introduced the first couple of weren't even speakers. He introduced the person who said the prayer, the person who said the Pledge of Allegiance and the Star Spangled Banner, and then left. But he was there, and he got a picture made with President Trump, or then candidate Trump. And Cavanis was, pointing out that's that was injecting partisanship into the races, and
But then Rawson responded by saying that he also had pictures with several other presidents, right?
Not only that, he had the pictures. He started brandishing the pictures and waving them around, showing that photos of him with Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and George W. Bush. I mean, he was talking about how and Joe Biden and Ted Kennedy, and he was just showing that he was nonpartisan.
He likes to get pictures with people. Basically.
Yeah, and in fact, he characterized himself as a collector of memorabilia, and he said he does the same thing with sports figures and rock and roll stars and. I don't know. I don't know. He didn't bring those. He only brought the ones with political figures. But so there was some good give and take there. It was a little livelier than the one in the primary when we had all four of the candidates who were in the primary were in that one. So it wasn't. This one was a little bit more lively. So. Which is kind of unusual. Like we said, the last time there was a contested race for municipal judge was 2003. Rawson won.
That was just in the primary. Right?
And Rawson won that one in the primary. He didn't have to go to the general election, and he won it easily. And the only other time, he's only run 3 times. This is the third time he's run. So
you mean the third time he's run with any opposition?
With opposition,
I think it's the 10th time he's actually run for the office.
Yeah. But he had opposition the first time he ran in '87, and then in 2003 he had an opponent. He won both of those in the primaries. So this is the first time in 20 years he's had an opponent. The first time ever he's had to go on to a general election, and it is definitely the closest because in the primary, they were very, very close. Rawson kind of nosed out Cavanis for the top vote getter. And as Cavanis would point out, 62% of the voters voted either for him or the other two opponents. So 62% of the voters want change. That's one of his themes in his campaign. And Rawson is countered by snagging the endorsements of the other two candidates.
So that was the other big thing that happened.
Yeah, Mary Ward and Andrew Beamer both have endorsed Rawson. And that leads into the second thing. That was on Monday. On Wednesday, Rawson was going to held a press conference to formally announce. We already reported that because we'd already asked him about it, but to formally announce that Beamer and Ward were endorsing him. Ward was not there, but Beamer was. And that would have been the story on that race for the day, just in and of itself. But Rawson actually made it a bigger story because for whatever reason decided to hold this press conference in the municipal courtroom in the new public safety complex, which happens to violate the city's code of ethics and the Supreme Court's rules of judicial conduct. You can't use the court as for political activities, the courtroom, the court facilities, court personnel, that sort of thing, for political activities. Same with the city. Their code of ethics prevents any official, no matter what, and it applies to the municipal judge, from using city property for political events. And and I got confirmation, that from Law Director Charles Swanson, that it applies to everybody who's an elected official, including the municipal judge. And there's no special.
Right, so it seems pretty like that was an ethical violation.
Yeah, it was an ethical violation, and it was. I mean, the state's rule on this is very straightforward. You cannot use a court facility or court staff or court resources in the course of a political campaign.
So what was Rawson's response when you raised that issue to him?
Well, he said he didn't know. I was able to. This was during. We had the press conference. After the press conference, I took him aside and had a one-on-one interview with him, and he was surprised. He said he did not realize that it was a violation of
I guess this is what happens when you don't have any contested races for so long. You forget the actual rules.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, it was pretty. He was, he thanked me for bringing it up. I mean, he wasn't combative or anything. He just said that he didn't realize that. He said that he did say that he had tried to call the state to make sure it was okay and didn't get a call back. He said he talked to some other lawyers in town that said they didn't know that there would be an issue with it, but he owned up to it. I mean, he said, well, I apologize for it. Apologize to the city for doing it because, it was, it was pretty straightforward that it was a violation. And
what are the possible consequences of that?
About the most severe consequence that would really happen is the state could reprimand him, just a written reprimand, and
it's not like it disqualifies.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't disqualify him from running. Wouldn't disqualify him from serving. Wouldn't have any real effect other than his permanent record would have a reprimand in it. So now Cavanis, of course, said that it kind of shows an inattention to detail that is in ethical matters that's not really acceptable and all, and so that was. I don't know how big of a role that will play in voters' minds, but it was certainly an interesting turn of events. I had never. One of the reasons, I had planned to ask about it when I got a press release 2 days ahead of time that this was going to happen. I said, well, how can he do that in a city courtroom? That's just not, that's not kosher. And then I looked it up, and of course it wasn't. And I've never seen a public official try to hold a press conference while running for re-election in a public place like that. So.
I can think of some times where people have held events outside of, outside the city county building, that kind of thing. But not actually, you couldn't do it in the main assembly room of the city county building or in the mayor's office or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So it was a little surprising that it happened, but it did. And like I said, Cavanis took Rawson to task for it, and Rawson did, take ownership of it and didn't try to deny anything. He just said, I messed up.
Cavanis also had good fundraising news this week, right? He's basically closed the fundraising gap.
Yeah, he has. He's, Rawson started out with he had money in the bank already before because he's been reelected. He's still been raising money, all along, but not much. I mean, he hasn't, he hasn't raised money at the clip of Tim Hill or Mayor Kincannon, but he had some money and was ahead in fundraising. And Cavanis basically outraised him by more than 2-1 in the last reporting period. And basically they're neck and neck in the amount of money they've raised during the campaign. So it's evened up quite a bit. It's not. It's kind of interesting when you look at we're talking about this kind of goes back to the partisanship thing. Whereas Rawson got a donation from the Knox County Republican Party, as we said, they endorsed him officially, which is very unusual, but they did. And they gave him a little bit of money. He also got a donation from the West Knox Republican Club. Cavanis, of course, the Democrats have not endorsed a candidate, and they don't in city elections. That doesn't prevent individual Democrats from doing things, or Democratic organizations. There's an organization of Democratic women in Knox County. They donated money to Cavanis, and a lot of Cavanis's donors are traditional Democratic donors. Some of them Democratic, either former candidates or former office holders. On Rawson's side, it's the same with Republicans. So it's even though Rawson is very adamant that he's not partisan in any way. At this press conference, he did concede that he said, I voted in Republican Party primaries. He said, but in many offices, that's the only time you'll have a chance to make a choice. He specifically mentioned, because he lives in West Hills, he mentioned the race between, I believe it was Elaine Davis and
Janet Testerman,
and basically, he said if I wanted a choice on which candidate was going to be on the ballot in the fall, said I had to vote in the Republican primary. Said, now I voted in the general election too. And I'm not going to tell you who I voted for in that, but so it was, as try as they might to both of them to say that it's completely nonpartisan. Well, there's still partisan undercurrents.
There's partisan shading on both sides to some degree. Well, it also, it gives every appearance of being a close race, although, of course, we have no way of knowing that.
Yeah.
We don't have any polls or anything, and it's probably going to be a low turnout election, so who knows, but...
it's going to be a low turnout election. I think everybody pretty much agrees to it. It's just kind of how low will it go. It's the judicial... the municipal court race is not one you would think would drive turnout a whole lot, although we don't really know that either because we haven't had a contested one since 2003.
Right, we have zero data on this.
It's much more likely that the couple of contested, we got 3 contested city council races that they will be the ones that drive turnout, and we'll see how that goes.
All right. Well, we also this past week had public announcement of the next steps in the Advanced Knox planning process, which we've talked about before. It's been going on for really about the last 18, 19 months. And this is Knox County's effort to update its overall general plan, which guides development and growth patterns across the county. And so they had a bunch of public input sessions at different points over this past year and a half. And now they've kind of gathered together all of that data and information, and they've come up with basically what they call a preferred scenario for future development, kind of showing where in the county they would like to try to incentivize and encourage more development, and where in the county could be protected from too much development or density. And the first step in this now, and this gets a little bit convoluted, so just stick with me for a second, because the county has a general plan, which hasn't been updated in about 20 years, which, as I said, kind of lays out that vision for the county. That is built on top of something called the Growth Policy Plan, and this is a state-required plan. This was something that state law that passed in the late 90s, requiring every county in the state to draw up a growth policy plan with a map basically showing where they anticipated growth, and those maps basically laid out kind of urban areas, urban growth areas that they called the planned growth area, which is sort of like the suburban areas around cities where you can anticipate that there will be growth, and then rural conservation areas outside that. Like, what are the places that everybody in the community kind of agrees, yeah, we want to preserve some open space here, whether that land is agricultural or recreational or just conservation areas. And so the county adopted that growth policy plan way back in 2001, and it hasn't touched it since. And Scott, I don't know if you've driven around Knox County anytime in the last 22 years, but the landscape looks a little bit different than it did in 2001.
I made my way around to most parts of Knox County in the last 20 years.
Well, some parts of Knox County have not changed much in that time, but parts of it have changed dramatically. And most areas have seen, some changes and some significant development. And so in order to change the county's general plan, which they want to update, first they have to change that growth policy plan. By state law, the county's own plan has to be in accord with its adopted growth policy plan. But to change the growth policy plan is not an easy thing. To do that, you need sign-off from something called the Growth Policy Coordinating Committee, which in the case of Knox County includes representatives from Knox County government, City of Knoxville government, Town of Farragut government, Knox County schools, all of our local utility systems, the Soil Conservation District, and there are one or two, the Knoxville Chamber, and then I think there's another one or two people on there as well. So lots of parties all have to be called together, look at the proposed changes, and say, yes, okay, we're okay with updating this map. Now, under the state law, this map was supposed to be updated like every 3 to 5 years. In practice, it has been updated 0 times since 2001, so they've got a lot of catch-up here to do. The catch is that even after that Growth Policy Coordinating Committee approves these changes, then they go back to all of the local legislative bodies. So Knox County Commission, Knoxville City Council, and the Town of Farragut Board of Mayor and Aldermen all have to agree to it. So multiple steps just to get to updating that map that then the county can use to update its own, overall plan for just the unincorporated areas of the county. So what's happening now is the Growth Policy Coordinating Committee has been reconvened. It's like, getting the band back together. County Mayor Glenn Jacobs actually tried to do this a few years ago, just before the pandemic hit. He had reconvened the Growth Policy Coordinating Committee, trying to do something a little simpler than what they're doing with the Advanced Knox process, which was really just to kind of make that map and future development subject to the county's own zoning process, own planning and zoning processes. And County Commission and the City of Knoxville both agreed to that at the time, but Farragut had a lot of concerns about it. Their biggest concern was if there's going to be a lot of growth and development outside and around Farragut, what would that mean for traffic inside Farragut, for their infrastructure? And so they actually voted it down, and that killed that process. And so that failed. So they're getting them back together again, having gone through now this much bigger scale advanced Knox process with all of this public input that they've had. And they've made sure that Farragut officials, among others, have been involved in it from day one, so that ideally, from the county's point of view, they don't get to that situation again where they put all this work in and still get shot down. So that group is meeting for the first time October 24th, 5 p.m. in the main assembly room of the City County Building, if you really want to come down and see this particular bit of sausage making. And then it will have to meet again. This is again, all set by state law. They have to meet at least twice before they can vote for any changes. So they'll have those changes presented to them at the October meeting. They will then call a meeting in November, probably the week before Thanksgiving. And the plan is to have that group then vote on those changes there. And then early next year, that would go back out to those local legislative bodies to approve it. So the county is hoping that by next spring, they will have an updated growth plan, growth policy plan, and especially the growth map. And if you want to see what the proposed growth map is, you can go to the Advanced Knox website, advancedknox.org, and you can see the areas that are designated for future development. Because that's really the big question here is, where is that boundary between sort of planned growth and the rural conservation areas, the areas that they're going to try to protect, keep to either agricultural use or very low-level kinds of development. You know, where will those boundaries be set? And if you compare that map to the one that is our current map, adopted in 2001, you can see it does push out those planned growth areas a bit into the green areas that are the designated rural growth areas. And this is all based on, you know, feedback that they got through the Advanced Knox process. There has been a lot of public input. But Scott, as we know, it's exactly when these kinds of planning processes turn from kind of conceptual discussions to the details of, okay, where exactly are we talking about? That's when these things can often get a little sticky in terms of, you know, one neighborhood or community group or preservation or conservation group or another coming out and saying, well, we like this map except for this area and this area and this area and that area.
Yeah, you know, the almost everybody in the past couple of years, as I've been covering the Planning Commission, almost everybody says, well, they need to do a better job planning where growth's going to go. Okay, they're doing it. And a lot of times that means it needs to grow somewhere else other than where I live. And yeah, I mean, it's you know, in this, it's still kind of conceptual. These things, this goes toward, it all builds up toward zoning.
Right.
You know, the zoning is the microcosm of it, and this is kind of the macro look. But yeah, it does get dicier as you start putting the actual boundaries in. Somebody's going to say, well, I think the boundary needs to be 2 subdivisions over, or, you know, another person says, no, it doesn't need to go that way at all. It needs to go the other way. And, you know, and so that's going to be, you know, you almost have to anticipate there are going to be some fights and struggles. But one of the things that is, about this is it's not really, you know, overall, I think county commissioners can sit there and go, well, yeah, there are going to be some people who don't like various parts of it, but overall it's a good idea to go ahead and get this done. The city really doesn't have a dog in the fight. The city of Knoxville doesn't have a dog in the fight, because
the city won't be affected by any of this because they have their own zoning and planning.
They have their own zoning and planning, and there is the urban growth boundary, which is areas where the city could annex in the future, but the state legislature has also made annexation almost impossible. It just about has to be a requested annexation, not a, you know, the city can't just decide they're going to annex an area anymore. And then you've got the town of Farragut, and as you mentioned earlier, the town of Farragut is kind of the it's the smallest of the three governments, and it's got just as large a voice as the other two. So it's probably smart politics to get the town of Farragut officials involved early on, and keep them involved and pay attention to their concerns, because that's they're the ones who are most likely to be able to throw a monkey wrench into things in an easy way. I think that you might have of the county commissioners, there might be one district where a district rep might not, his constituents might hate what's being proposed, and they might say, okay, well, I'm going to vote against it or whatever. But then you got the others who are all fairly well happy with it. Well, that's okay. But Farragut, they've got their own voice.
Yeah. And they have to be okay with it along with everybody else. Yeah. And you mentioned zoning, which is sort of like that is the ultimate end result of all of this, right? You go through all the planning, and then there will be zoning updates to accord with the new plans. Mm-hmm. And to that end, the other thing that's happening this month, County Commission is supposed to consider, if they get, they're still negotiating this contract. Last time I checked with county officials, and so we'll see if it's actually ready for a vote by commission this month. But they are hiring an outside firm. So they hired one outside firm to run the advanced Knox process. That was Kimley Horn. And they have another firm that they're looking to hire to start working on something they're calling a Unified Development Ordinance. And this is the thing that will help bring all of what comes out of all of these planning processes kind of down to the brass tacks of like, okay, what kind of development, where they're also looking at possibly streamlining some county development processes and things like that. But they anticipate that, so they'll just be voting on that contract to hire that third party this month. But then that would be another 2-year process where that group will look at all the existing, planning and zoning, and do another set of rounds of public engagement and kind of trying to get down to more specifically, especially housing, what kinds of housing will be allowed where. And one of the big discussions in the whole advanced Knox process has been about looking for places to allow a greater range and especially a greater density of housing in some specific areas around the county, because most of the growth in the unincorporated areas outside the city for years and years has just been single-family developments, one subdivision after another. Mm-hmm. And there is a consensus, at least in the advanced Knox process and the feedback that they got from people, that a lot of people believe that we need more options, that, if Knox County is going to continue to grow, it can't just be, single family house, that yes, there will be more of that for sure. Nobody's talking about stopping that. But that there also need to be, sort of the middle housing that we've talked about, your duplexes and townhomes and so forth, and apartment buildings, apartment complexes, places where, in a relatively small area, you can house hundreds of people instead of just a couple of dozen. So all of that is still to come. And I know this all sounds very tedious and technical, and believe me, it is. We sit through these meetings. We can tell you how tedious and technical it is, but it is actually important. These are the things that are going to literally shape the future growth and development of Knox County. And so if you're interested in all of those issues, you can go to the advancedknox.org website and kind of follow along. Okay, speaking of development in a very specific way, the city of Knoxville acquired some property on the south waterfront this week. What's that all about?
Well, it's all about the pedestrian bridge that is proposed and not funded, but very much desired by the city administration and part of the the South Knoxville waterfront vision plan.
And very much desired by the University of Tennessee.
And very much desired by the University of Tennessee. In fact, there's a piece of property, Valley Apparel is the most recent tenant there, on the riverfront in South Knoxville on Blunt Avenue. And that UT, the Board of Trustees had already approved spending $9 million to buy this parcel of property with this building on it to be the southern end of where this bridge, this pedestrian bridge would come. The northern end would be between Thompson Bowling Arena, and I'm not using the corporate
right. Not until they pay us.
Yeah, well, I can't remember which corporate entity. Oh, I know which corporate entity is. I just don't.
It's a corporate entity that recently had to pay a fine to the state for their involvement in drug trafficking.
Yeah, really.
Just saying.
Yeah. Anyway, between Thompson Bowling Arena and Pratt Pavilion over there, that'll be the northern end of the bridge. The southern end of the bridge will be at this Valley Apparel site. But UT is not buying it yet, really. And they're really not buying it. The KCDC, the city's housing agency, actually wrote the check for it. It was $9 million to the entity that owns it, which is Knox River Warehouses, which is a partnership of some pretty prominent business owners. Sam Furrow and Hoyle Gill and Bill Sansom are the principals in it. But anyway, KCDC is actually going to own this property, and it's kind of it's not really too unusual, but this was something that had been brought up before. They're using the funding they're using is from the tax increment financing district that is the South Waterfront. For those who aren't well versed on this, in a tax increment financing district, the new revenues, property tax revenues generated by new development, go into a pool of money, and that money can be used to improve infrastructure and incentivize other projects. So that money is going to be used was used for the actual purchase. Now, the University of Tennessee is going to reimburse KCDC for this. So, at the end of the day, UT will have paid for the property, but it'll be KCDC's property. And what they're going to be doing is they're going to be preparing it for redevelopment. And the University of Tennessee and the City of Knoxville are going to be the real redevelopment partners. They'd already signed a memorandum of understanding about this back in February. So to kind of set out the parameters of this deal. In fact, because that memorandum of understanding was signed, and because KCDC was using the tax increment financing money to actually write the check, this doesn't even go to City Council for approval. I mean, it's done. And so they're going to redevelop the site. And in talking to folks from the city, they're going to be redeveloping the site no matter what.
You mean right, whether the bridge
is there or not? What they're looking at is, now, yes, they certainly want the bridge to be there, but there's going to be a mixed use development aspect of it too. There's also going to be some open space there. I don't know how much of that will be. Probably mostly focused along the riverfront. There, extension of the Riverwalk. Those kinds of things will be, because it's an almost 7-acre parcel, so it's pretty good sized piece of property, and but it is the primary reason to do this is to build the bridge. Of course, we've talked about this before. They have $20 million in the bank from the state of Tennessee, and that's it. The bridge. The original estimate was $70 million. They've tasked their engineering consultant to change up the design to try to get it down to around $55 million. They've applied for a federal grant that they were turned down for it, or passed over for it. More accurately, this year they're going to reapply for that grant. They think that city officials think that now that they've got the property in place and UT is definitely on board and all of that will strengthen their applications. Very competitive grant. Cities all over the country want new bridges, and that's essentially what this does. And so the big infrastructure projects. So that funding isn't in place. Of course, that rubs some people the wrong way. Councilwoman Seema Singh was who cast one of the two votes against going into a memorandum of understanding with UT. Basically, when I talked to her, she was saying, "Hey, I don't treat my bank account this way. If I don't have the money, I don't anticipate spending the money. I've got to have the money first." And she said she thought it was irresponsible to go ahead and spend the money. On the other hand, Tommy Smith, who is the city council member who represents South Knoxville and the University of Tennessee campus, talked about it being an opportunity. They've got this you're going to have this mixed use development right there in the middle of the Scottish Pike area in West Blunt Avenue, where that area is west of Chapman Highway. Most of the South Waterfront developments happened east of Chapman Highway along Sevier Avenue, and a lot of the residents want more development on their side of Chapman Highway to an extent. They don't want to replace all the single family homes that are there and those kinds of things, but they want, because those are their homes. Those are the residents there. But they want development to be compatible with their with the property, but they do want development there, and so Smith thinks this is something that can kind of convince people in the private sector to come along and develop suitable commercial property along Blunt Avenue in much the same way that Suttree Landing Park has helped with development along Sevier Avenue. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's at this point. Basically, all this is a lot of the hullabaloo over buying a piece of property.
Right.
So the next step is the city and the university are going to kind of go through a public engagement process. They're going to talk to residents. They're going to talk to stakeholder groups. They're going to kind of see what is possible for this particular site. One of the things that UT wants out of it is obviously student housing, or housing that can be marketed to faculty and staff, and that would be within walking distance of the campus.
As long as there's a bridge, it's within
as long as there's a bridge, it's within walking distance. Well, when you look at it, if a pedestrian bridge across there would make it closer, it'd be closer to live on Blunt Avenue to campus. It'd be closer there than it would be from, say, Highland or Forest
right.
Avenue and the Fort Sanders to points on campus. So it's you've got the river in between, but when the river is no longer an obstacle, it's very close.
Right. Well, it turns the river into an amenity. You get to cross it on your way to
class. And so UT is very excited about that, and of course, it aligns with the city's desire to develop the South Waterfront. So, of course, it's still up in the air about whether they're going to be able to build this bridge.
Have they thought about a zip line?
I've not even asked that. I have insufficient creativity to even.
I think we have some of the world's leading zipline experts up in Gatlinburg. Maybe they could provide them with a lower cost option.
Well, it would be tough because the bridge, even the bridge as it is, the South Bank is lower. Where the bridge is going to land is lower than it is on the Knox side. So I don't know. It'd be a lot of fun going from the from UT to the South Waterfront, but it'll be tough coming back unless they extend it on and do from the from somewhere over on the hill leading up to Fort Dickerson. I guess you could do that. So it'd be a really long zip line, so it might be fun.
Yeah, no, it could be a something that would draw adventurous students from all over the country.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Well, of course, we will see what happens as that bridge issue continues to develop or does not. Tim Burchett. We talked to Tim Burchett this week. We actually talked to him sort of at this in-between point that we are at now, as I said earlier, because we're taping this on Thursday afternoon, and I think the Republican Congressional Caucus is in a closed-door meeting right now trying to hammer out this whole question of who the next speaker is going to be. But as we talked about last week, of course, Burchett was one of the 8 Republicans who voted to vacate the position and basically kicked former Speaker Kevin McCarthy out of that seat. Burchett is a deficit hawk, a fiscal hawk. He always has been. And he was displeased with the deal that McCarthy had made with Democrats to pass a continuing resolution to keep the government from shutting down. And, of course, it only extended it for 45 days, and we're going to come up against that deadline. I think we've already burned through,
almost 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. So that deadline is still coming at us pretty quick. But this past week on Wednesday, the Republican conference met, and in a closed-door vote, but the results of it were reported, a very close vote. Representative Steve Scalise of Louisiana was named the nominee to be the Republican nominee to be the next speaker, beating out Jim Jordan of Ohio, but only by about 14 votes, I think. So it was not an overwhelming mandate. And immediately a bunch of the Jordan supporters came out and said that they were not going to support Scalise, that they were still not happy. Burchett has endorsed Scalise. He had said that he would support either Jordan or Scalise, whoever got the most votes in conference. He did not say who he personally voted for in that in-conference vote, but that he would support the winner. And he has endorsed Scalise for it. But when I talked to him, he basically said that he thinks it's important for them to get all of this dealt with and get a speaker in place, because there are a lot of things to deal with, obviously, and that the House is kind of functionally unable to proceed with business as long as it doesn't have a speaker. Like, there's a lot of things that can't happen until there's a Speaker of the House in place. But I asked Burchett what kind of reaction he had gotten, both in D.C. From his Republican colleagues and from his constituents here in East Tennessee for his vote to vacate the speaker position. And he, maybe not surprisingly, he said that he doesn't care what people in D.C. thinks, as he likes to say, that he's not there to please them, but that he said that he's gotten mostly strong support from people in the district. That's what he has heard, that people were frustrated with McCarthy and with the way business was being done in the House under McCarthy, and that also that people understood that this is, one of Burchett's strongest convictions is the need to control federal spending. It is, in fact, something he talks about all the time in all of his campaigns. He has always said that. He has voted very consistently. He's always voted against continuing resolutions to kind of these stopgap spending measures. He's voted against raising the debt limit. He basically thinks that we're spending too much money, and what we need to do is, make some painful decisions probably to bring our spending back in line with federal revenues. Of course, he does not also talk about the possibility of raising more revenues, which is the other option that you have there. But ideologically, that's not something that he's typically been in favor of. And, he basically said that if this, I asked him, does this mean that we are going to have a government shutdown, because presumably whoever that next speaker is, they're going to take the lesson of the McCarthy example, which is that he made a deal to keep the government open and was promptly ousted. And so does that mean that the next speaker is going to have to be willing to shut the government down? And Burchett said he thinks there is another option, which is just passing a budget, which, of course, is much easier than it sounds. It's something that Congress has, in fact, failed to do for multiple years in a row now, which is why we have these omnibus bills and continuing resolutions. But he also said that he thinks the threat and fear of a government shutdown is overblown, that we've had this happen multiple times in the past. They're usually pretty short, 4 to 10 days, and that in fact, most government functions do continue operating during that time, and people who are in the military will still get paid. Now that pay may be backdated a little bit, but that basically he thinks the short-term risk of a government shutdown is easier to bear than the long-term risk of what he sees as runaway federal spending, and that basically he's going to continue to vote that conviction regardless of the consequences, because he thinks it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, the one thing about Burchett, whether you agree with him or not, is that he is not a fiscal hypocrite. He has said the same thing for years and years and years. He said the same things before he went to Washington.
Right.
He said
when he was county mayor, he didn't like taxes, he didn't like debt, and those were the
and
two
he
things.
railed against Washington the entire time too, and he has voted that way since going to Washington. So the one thing you can't say, now you can disagree with him, and I know a lot of people who vehemently disagree with him, but you can't accuse him of being two-faced about the budget. And as for the leadership question, that is a really the Republican Party has put itself in a really difficult position, because it's got, they do have a majority, but it's so slim that they just about have to be unanimous in everything that they do, and that's very, very difficult, especially when you've got a fractured party, and they do.
Yep.
They have a very, very tiny majority, but they get no votes from the Democrats. Democrats are not going to help them. Hakeem Jeffries is going to get every single Democratic vote for speaker.
Yep.
And without, the only way that a Republican speaker could get a majority without the kind of right-wing revolutionaries within the party would be to make concessions to Democrats, which obviously they're not going to do either.
Yeah.
So it's really whoever. Scalise if Scalise ends up being the speaker, and anybody else, whoever ends up being the speaker, is going to face the exact same challenge that ended up being McCarthy's downfall.
Yep. Well, and probably by the time you all are hearing this, the issue of who the speaker is going to be will have been resolved, unless something's gone especially wrong with the Republican conference.
Well, that's the thing. We're taping this on Thursday, and it's going to come out on Sunday. But given the things that have happened in the House in the last couple of weeks, it could very well still be unresolved, right, as you guys are listening to this.
Yeah.
So,
and even if it is resolved, more to the point, as you're saying, all of those challenges, the fiscal challenges, the political challenges of managing such a small majority, all of those are still going to be there. And I think we can anticipate there's going to be more drama in the near future around all of this, one way or another, and probably multiple ways.
I'll get the popcorn.
Yeah. But we know how Tim Burchett will probably vote on all of those things. Yeah. Okay, well, let's go ahead and take a quick break here. We'll come back with our Q&A segment. Okay, we are now to the Q&A portion of the podcast. Every week we go on to our subscriber-only Facebook group, the Compass Colloquy, which you can join if you are a Compass subscriber, which you can become by going to CompassKnox.com. And we ask our readers if there's anything beyond sort of the obvious headlines they'd like to hear about on the podcast. We did have a couple of questions this week. One of our readers sort of wanted us to talk about the activities of the local Proud Boy organization, which, if you're familiar with the Proud Boys, you know that they are it's a little bit hard to describe them. They're kind of like a quasi militia group. They have been involved in some violent activities. Actually, their leader, their former leader, Enrique Tarrio, was tried and convicted for involvement in the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, and there was a lot of Proud Boy involvement there. Mm-hmm. And it's a sort of loosely affiliated group that has grown over the past 20 years, and I think has attracted a lot of the same people who were already involved in various kinds of white supremacist activities, Christian nationalist activities, culturally conservative / Second Amendment loving, again, sort of quasi-militia groups. Proud Boys like to show up armed at various kinds of public events. And there are, I've been at events, and Scott, you probably have too, where there have been people there wearing Proud Boys gear. It's often branded with a yellow PB. That's how you can spot them. And I have never witnessed anybody engaging in violence, but this is a group that has been involved in violence in multiple instances across the country. And they are active in East Tennessee. I saw them most recently outside the anti-drag show protest at the Tennessee Theater in December. They have shown up at events in Blount County, and they showed up just the other weekend at the Knox Pride Fest. They tend to be anti-LGBTQ. It's an interesting group because they're not explicitly religious in the way that some other sort of far-right groups are, but at the same time they gravitate toward these very kind of culturally conservative positions. And so, the reader had seen them at the Pride rally and was just kind of curious about their presence. I think that on the one hand, this isn't a new phenomenon. The presence of the Proud Boys themselves is a little bit more recent, but we have had white supremacists and KKK members, various other kinds of groups showing up at events around East Tennessee, certainly for generations, really. I mean, honestly, I first moved to Knoxville in 1994, and one of the first episodes that I heard about was, at the time, it was skinheads. You don't really hear so much about skinheads anymore. I think Proud Boys are sort of like the modern descendants of what we used to call skinheads, but back in the 90s, there were skinheads that were engaging in violence around town. So that's not new, and maybe to some degree, it's easy to be a little bit blasé about them because it tends to be small groups of them when you see them, and mostly they show up and hold sort of aggressive, offensive signs, and maybe shout at people and engage in verbal back and forth. But in the current circumstance, obviously we've seen instances. There was the 2017 rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, that turned quite violent. And we have also started to see, not so much here in Knox County, but in some parts of the country and in some parts of Tennessee, actual direct engagement with some of these groups, with office holders, with candidates. There's been a lot of coverage here recently about this mayoral race in Franklin, Tennessee, where Gabrielle Hansen, one of the candidates, has gotten national attention for some things and positions that she's taken that are kind of out there, I guess is the nicest way to put it. But also, she apparently invited, now these weren't Proud Boys, but they were members of a local militia group there in Williamson County. She apparently asked, according to them anyway, she asked them to come and provide security at an event. This was an avowedly like white supremacist neo-Nazi group there, and that was then promptly kind of denounced by all the other office holders there in Franklin. Although Hansen has kind of tried to explain it away, but not directly apologize for it. So, I don't know. Like, what do we think about the Proud Boys now, Scott? Are they just sort of like a small, noisy group who don't pose any real threat, or are we at a point where some of the lines between those groups and people who are more part of the actual political establishment and mainstream have gotten a little blurry?
Yeah, well, I think that I think there is a concern that of violence, and I think it's justified, as you mentioned. Proud Boys were very prominent among the groups that attacked the Capitol on January 6th, and so it's not. That's not an overreaction to be concerned about that. I think what is unusual is that there are people like Hansen who are elected officials and embracing, these groups, which is troubling. I think that is, and it's not completely a phenomenon of the right. Although right now I think it's mostly a far right phenomenon, but it's it's disturbing in that these are groups that are by number and by ideology fringe groups, but you've got people who are elected officials who you would assume are the mainstream can be pretty wide, but they're at least within it. They might be closer to one shore or the other, but they're within it. But being having them embrace these groups is a little bit, I think, a cause of concern. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people are concerned about that. And it doesn't take when you have groups that are that use violent rhetoric, and I think Proud Boys and other groups do use violent rhetoric a lot, and violent rhetoric in and of itself, is not illegal, but it is. There's always the danger that somebody's going to be, as they might put it, forced to back up their words. And so when you. It's kind of like being on the playground when you're a kid, and you say come on, throw a punch at me, and okay, well somebody might, and then you're in an actual fight, and it's kind of it's one of those things where you use that rhetoric, and at some point you may feel compelled to back it up or challenge someone who's making that rhetoric, and then they back it, try to back it up, and it's. The potential for violence is there.
And so given that, what's your observation of how law enforcement deals with this when these groups show up at public events, whether it's something like the Pride Festival we just had or a candidate event or whatever? Because I know that there's often a perception, well, there can be perceptions from sort of people both on the left and the right that law enforcement is more aggressive toward them and less aggressive toward their opponents. But kind of how, like here in Knoxville, how do the police deal with that?
Well, from what I've observed, and I don't make it to every protest or every confrontational event, so that's caveat number one, is that inside the city of Knoxville, the Knoxville Police Department tends to lay back and observe, or stay back and observe. I noticed in when there were protests during Black Lives Matter protests, and in following the death of Anthony Thompson Jr., when there were marches, things like that, KPD would be there. They would be keeping an eye on things, maybe from a block away or a couple of blocks behind or something like that. But they really weren't. They tended to let the protest play out without being too big of a presence. I think everybody knew they were around. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they weren't. They weren't stealth. Undercover, things. I mean, they were in their SUVs and in their uniforms and things like that. So, and I think that was probably the case at the Pride Festival. I think that a lot of times they will let people, they'll keep an eye on people to see if there's, they're ready to react. But I think that they generally hold back, because I mean, one of the things is whether you're on the right or the left, repugnant speech is still protected speech. I mean, you can't throw somebody in jail because they wear a Proud Boys outfit, or a mask. It's one of the things the Proud Boys do is they often wear masks. They have nothing to do with COVID, but they wear masks all the time. And so now, that's not the only way you can go about doing it. The sheriff's department, on the other hand, which of course most of the protests and events that would draw protesters occur inside the city limits. But the Knox County Sheriff's Department or Sheriff's Office is much more about a show of force. They're much more likely to be to bring out as many officers as possible. And case in point here was one of the after Attorney General Sharm Allen determined that no criminal charges will be brought against the officers involved in the Anthony Thompson Jr. shooting. A group of protesters went out to protest at her house. Of course, their problem was they protested at the wrong house. It wasn't anywhere close to where Sharm Allen actually lived. There was a family named Allen that lived there, but completely had nothing to do with the district attorney. But they were there protesting, and it was a subdivision in out in the county. And when they were leaving, then you came out. Almost every, it seemed like just about every on duty officer with the sheriff's office was there. They were really, and they made sure there was an helicopter. They had large vehicles. They made sure that the protesters, knew that they were there, and they're much more aggressive in that kind of way. And it's the same way with we had protests in the city county building at county commission meetings and city council meetings. Even when they think there might be the chance of an incident at a city council meeting, KPD will have people outside the city county building and not so much inside. If it's the sheriff's office and the county commission meeting, sheriff's deputies are lining the walls. There's a lot. So it's a different approach. But KPD tends to be there and watch from a distance. That can lead to a perception or reality that they would allow things to happen that might not happen if they were more aggressive. But they seem to be fairly. It seems to be just kind of the general rule for them is to hold back, watch, and wait, and be prepared to move forward if something happens.
Before somebody starts emailing us to say you're equating the Proud Boys with Black Lives Matter, and no, we're not equating Proud Boys with Black Lives Matter. But in thinking about how does law enforcement respond to sort of tense events, demonstrations, protests, things where there could be fights, there could potentially be physical confrontations. Those are some of the instances we've seen. Now, somebody could certainly argue that, well, the sheriff's office, because the examples we're talking about mostly have to do with social justice protesters. We're not talking about the sheriff's office confronting Proud Boy white supremacist protesters, because that hasn't happened in areas that the sheriff has jurisdiction over.
The Proud Boys haven't protested anything in Farragut or Powell that I'm aware of.
Right.
So it's.
But somebody could certainly say that. Well, the sheriff's office is more likely to have a show of force against black protesters, social justice protesters, and so forth. And sort of statistically, that's true. But those are also the handful of situations where that's come up, so it's a little hard to say. But I just want to make the point, like, we're not drawing
this has nothing
moral
to do
equivalence between those groups, but thinking about the law enforcement response to the possibility of civil unrest, essentially.
Well, I mean, it's what law enforcement does in situations where protests or counter protests could lead to an incident that would require a response.
Right.
It has nothing to do. Yeah, if anybody got that idea, they're crazy. But the idea that these groups are similar, it's more the situation, not the group.
Right.
So.
Well, anyway, as far as the Proud Boy and sort of white supremacist presence, both at events, but also I think maybe even more importantly in the actual political process itself in Tennessee, certainly bears watching. Okay, looking ahead to the coming weeks, several things on the agenda. County Commission will meet for its monthly work session Monday at 5 o'clock in the main assembly room of the City County building. This month's agenda has a few potentially interesting things on it, although it's not completely clear if all of them will actually be on the agenda. We talked about that Unified Development Ordinance and the contract for that. They were still working on that, so the hope is to have that ready. And I'm sure there will be talk about that if they do end up voting on it. They are deferring until November a vote on the new ambulance contract. As we talked about a few weeks ago, they got 4 responses to the county's request for proposals to provide ambulance service in Knox County. And they were hoping to have that on the October agenda, but that is being pushed to November. But what they are doing is Commission is going to meet also on Monday at 2:30 p.m. in the main assembly room ahead of their regular work session to hear the details of a report from their consultant on ambulance services, which helped them draw up the request for proposals and just really get an overview of kind of the needs of the county and the specific things that they're looking for in that contract. So that should be an interesting discussion on Monday. Also on Monday, there will be yet another candidate forum.
Yeah, this one is going to be for the city council races. And I misspoke earlier. I think I mentioned that there were 3 contested city council races. There are only 2 now. So there were the only 2 races where we have the big races are the at-large seat C race between Tim Hill and incumbent Amelia Parker. Then we've got the seat B race between R. Bentley Marlowe and Debbie Helsley. Those candidates will be at the forum and making their cases, and we'll obviously be there. Jesse, you're going to be moderating, aren't you?
I get to moderate again. Yeah, this one's going to be at 6:30 Monday at West High School.
West High School, yeah.
Yep. So if you want to learn more about those candidates, hear what they have to say, or ask them a question, because actually the questions at these forums come from the audience.
Right.
Come on out to that. And then City Council itself meets on Tuesday.
Yes, City Council meets on Tuesday. One of the interesting things that's on their agenda is we've mentioned this in context with the middle housing thing. Several of the council members have said that the city, needs to encourage development along its corridors, use corridor space for residential development as well as commercial development, mixed use, in other words, along these. And there's going to be a resolution calling for the use of incentives to get developers to build mixed use developments along corridors. A lot of some of the corridors have got some unused or underused properties. I think Chapman Highway is one that usually it's pointed out. Some parts of Clinton Highway, some parts of Broadway closer into the city. These are Asheville Highway and Magnolia. So that the idea is to rapidly increase the amount of housing that's available, and it's got pretty good support. There are 4 co-sponsors. Vice Mayor Andrew Roberto's putting it up, and then Charles Thomas, Amelia Parker, Seema Singh are all signed on to it as well. That's going to be it's one of those things. It's one of those resolutions though that urges the creation of this, but if these incentives do come to bear, it'll be because the administration will pick it up and go with it. And then that you mentioned the forum on Monday. Well, early voting actually begins on Wednesday. So we'll have early voting for the general election. Starts be 6 locations. It goes through November 2nd. And you can go there. There are the 4 city council races, the 2 contested ones, and the 2 that where there's only one candidate, and then plus the city judge race that we talked about earlier. So all those will be on the ballot. You can start voting on Wednesday. The election day is the 7th of November. So,
all right. Busy week. We will be back next week to talk about all of that and anything else that happens in between. I think that wraps us up for this week. Thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber, our producer at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright. And we'll talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.